Hi guys, welcome back. Today's story is gonna be very interesting. It is about a person who I think was the original Chris Watts, who murdered his entire family, and I'm not sure why this story is not as talked about as Chris Watts. This person is a monster, and I'm not saying that Chris Watts wasn't a monster, because he was more than a monster. I guess he didn't deserve the fame that he got, and this guy is also a murderer. It's not very well known, I would say. And one fun fact is that I used to live where Chris Watts' house was, not very far. It was like 20 minutes away from his house in Colorado. Chris Watts' story is very crazy, and I don't think I will ever talk about it because it's been talked about in every single true crime channel, I think. So it's not very unknown, and it's just repeating the same things, the same facts over and over again. But I actually followed that story of Chris Watts from the beginning, before he was even found guilty, before he even went to the interrogation. And I'm just saying that this story is not as well known as Chris Watts, but it should be, because the crimes are very similar in nature. And I will be crocheting with you guys this mesh bottle holder. So I've made the beginning already, and now I'm just gonna be crocheting this mesh stitch that just consists of double crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, double crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, and this is how we're gonna be doing that. I've made one already. This is how it looks. So you put the bottle in here. This is for smaller bottles, so like plastic water bottles or something like that, that you want to take with you on a hike or something. Very easy to make and very fast to make as well. And I will write the pattern in the description as usual. Christian Michael Stewart was born on January 23rd, 1974. He was born in Iowa. Christian's mother was just a teenager when she had him, and his father was an abusive alcoholic. Christian also had a brother by the name of Dustin, and unfortunately the father abused them both along with their mother, which in turn led Joy, who was Christian's mother, to remarry when Christian was only 4 years old. Longo, who she met while working as a cashier at a Target store, and he was her co-worker. Joe actually adopted both Chris and Dustin, and this is why they both took his last name. Joe eventually moved up in retail and became a district manager of the Target store. He started making pretty decided to stop working and spend more time with her kids because she didn't need to work anymore since Joe was making such a good money. While she was staying at home, a Jehovah's Witness came to her house by knocking on the door, and she opened, and she got really interested in the religion, even though her and Joe were both Catholic. Joy began to attend meetings at the Jehovah's Witness organization, what they called it, and she also participated in field services. And these field services meant that she was going door to door, going to people's houses, knocking and proselytizing about the religion. And Joy usually took her boys with her when she was doing that. This religion taught Chris how to talk to people, taught him everything he needs to know. Joe Longo ended up getting a job as a retail manager at another store. So he moved his whole family to Michigan. And they moved to a town called Ypsilanti in Michigan. It's a very small town. So this is when Chris started getting homeschooled by their mother. Both him and his brother were homeschooled, so they no longer attended public school. And they would also attend the School of Jehovah's Witness for young adults. Which taught them not to mingle with anyone outside of their religion, as they call them worldly. So they're not supposed to be friends or date anyone that's outside their religion. In his teen years, Christian continued his work for the Jehovah's Witness organization, and he also, during this time, had 2 part-time jobs. Just like any teenager trying to make some extra money for himself. Now, let me tell you about Mary Jane Baker, who is going to be the future wife of Christian. Mary Jane was born on April 25th, 1967 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Ann Arbor was about 20 miles away from Ypsilanti, where Chris grew up. Mary Jane was the middle of 5 children. Her family was also not originally Jehovah's Witness, and just like Chris's family, Mary Jane's mom, Susan, only became a Jehovah's Witness after her and Mary Jane's dad divorced. Mary Jane, however, went to a public school and she graduated, and after that she got herself a job as a secretary. At the University of Michigan Dental School. Mary Jane met Chris through their organization, and Mary Jane immediately became attracted to Chris. When Chris found out that Mary Jane is attracted to him, he also immediately fell attracted to her, and he wanted to date her. However, his parents weren't so thrilled because at this time Chris was only 18 years old, and so his parents gave him an ultimatum that if he wants to continue living under their roof, he needs to stop dating Mary Jane. And Chris chose to move out the next week after this ultimatum. This was his first time by himself in the real world. he shared with 5 other guys. 5 months later, after he moved out, during a group trip to the Jehovah's Witness headquarters, which is located in Brooklyn, New York, Chris saw Mary Jane there and managed to get her alone at the hotel restaurant. And this is when he proposed to her. With a diamond ring. I mean, this ring was a huge diamond ring. And of course, Mary Jane said yes. So how do you think that Chris got money for this huge diamond ring, plus afford to pay his apartment during this time? Because he only worked as a cashier at a local camera store inside a mall. And how was he able to afford that, you wonder? He actually didn't really afford it. He was struggling to make ends meet after getting a payment plan on this ring. So he got it on a credit, but he was unable to make payments. 3 months later, after the engagement, Chris was working at a camera shop as usual when a person walked in and gave him $108 in cash to put towards a down payment for a camcorder. And this is when Chris decided to take this money and pocket it. And after work, he took this money, went to the jewelry store that was located inside the same mall that he was working at, and made one of the payments for the diamond ring that he bought. When it was found that $108 were missing from the till, the manager started questioning all the employees that were working that day, and nobody seemed to know anything. The next day, Chris was scheduled to open the store. He went in, opened the store, put the keys on a counter and a check for $108, and also a resignation letter. And with that, he left the store. However, his boss still pressed charges, and Chris was convicted of a misdemeanor embezzlement, and he received 80 hours of community service for that. Chris decided to confess to Mary Jane, and she forgave him. Chris promised her that he would never do anything like that again, and he also promised that he would never lie to her again. That was probably the biggest lie he's ever told her. Chris also decided to tell everything to his church, and the church decided to put him on restrictions. One of their restrictions was that Chris could not get married in their kingdom hall, which was a very big deal to Mary Jane. But over time, Mary Jane decided that their relationship is more important to her than where they're gonna get married. So they ended up getting married on March 13th, 1993. Chris's parents actually came back to their lives and gifted the couple to honeymoon in Jamaica. Publishers Circulation Fulfillment Center, which was a company that delivered Wall Street Journal and New York Times. Pay was good, and also Chris worked very early mornings delivering those newspapers. So he had the whole day to spend with Mary Jane. After the wedding, the couple moved into their own apartment, and Chris actually lied to the landlord and told him that he works for the New York Times newspaper. He didn't really work for New York Times per se, but it was important for Chris to look like he has money all the time. And saying that you work for New York Times sounds more prestigious than saying that you're a paper boy for a fulfillment company. In 1990s, Chris got himself into some financial problems. First of all, Chris was sued for not making monthly payments that he told Mary Jane that he moved out from his previous place, but he actually didn't move out and he never paid any rent there. This is why he moved out. And so the landlord sued him for that. He also got a retail credit card on his and Mary Jane's name after they got married, and he spent all the money on his credit card and failed to make any payments. So he owed over $1,400 on his credit card because Chris liked to spend money, as you haven't noticed yet, and he liked to spend above his means. During this time, Chris also began to view himself as a photographer because he used to work at the camera store. So he was thinking that he knows everything about cameras. So he spent a lot of money on credit to buy himself a very nice camera and also very nice camera equipment, which is very expensive. He also got himself a brand new computer, and this was very rare, first of all, in mid-90s to have a computer, a brand new one, but not for Chris's family. The couple also constantly took vacations to Mexico and Jamaica. So the family and friends started to wonder eventually, where were they getting all this money? On February 28, 1997, the first child, Zachary, was born. At this time, Chris was also promoted at the distribution center to be manager there, and he decides to buy himself a brand new car and a pool table that he was gonna put in their new house that they purchased from Mary Jane's parents. Not long after that, a daughter, Sadie, was born on April 30th, 1998, so almost exactly a year after their son was born. About a week after the daughter was born, Chris was sent to San Francisco because there was a newspaper distribution strike that was happening there. And since he was now a manager, he needed to be there to get all the papers out on time. The company actually made Chris stay there in San Francisco for a whole week. And after a week passed, when they told him that he needs to stay there longer, Chris decided to quit his job. Because Chris said that he vowed to his family that he will not miss his daughter's first words, his daughter's first steps, like he did with his son Zachary, because of his job. This is when he got himself another job as a salesman for a fireplace and spa company. This is where he would sell fireplaces to local construction companies. And even though he wasn't getting paid as well as his previous job, he was still happy because he was able to spend more time with his family. In 1998, the family decided to take out a loan to get themselves a brand new jet ski. Why else would you take out a loan for? And a brand new Dodge Durango car. At this time, Mary Jane was also pregnant again with her third child. Baby girl Madison was born on October 19th, 1999. She was 7 weeks premature, and she had respiratory issues that required for her to stay in the hospital for about a month. And this put a huge financial strain on the family. And they were already in a lot of debt. This is when Chris decided to quit his salesman job and open his own business, a cleaning business. And to everyone around them, it looked like Chris's business was doing so good. Even his own father invested some money in his business, but his business was actually failing, and Chris was now in a lot more debt than he was before because he didn't know how to run a business, and business requires a lot of money from the beginning. Running your own business is so expensive. So, what do you think Chris did when he became more in debt? He started spending more money to make it look like that his business is actually doing really good to everyone around him. And in reality, he was just putting himself more and more in debt. This is when he started stealing again. One day, Mary Jane and their 3 kids are driving down the road in their brand new van that Chris just bought, when suddenly the family gets pulled over by police and Christian gets arrested because, plot twist, the van that they were driving, Chris stole that van. So Chris would constantly tell his wife that he would go trade in vehicles for newer vehicles, and this is how they would constantly have brand new cars. Chris actually created himself a fake license using a fancy scanner and printer that he bought with his fancy computer, and he also got himself a laminator. And I think back in the days, the licenses were just laminated, so they weren't actually, cards like we have nowadays. So he printed the license with nice printer, and then he laminated it to make it look like a real thing. And he used the name Jason Fortner. And with this license, he went to the dealerships. And this is when he found this van standing in the dealership, took it, and at a charge of forgery. So a stolen car, a forgery, he only gets probation and still walking around a free man. However, his wife now knows about all his lies to her, and he promised her he would never lie to her again. She now knew that Chris only cares about what people think about him than how things actually are. So, after his arrest, the church found out about it and kicked him out of the church. And he also has to pay restitution now for the stolen car and court fees for probation. So a lot more debt he was getting himself into. But, however, this didn't stop him from committing more crimes. And shortly after his arrest, he actually ended up opening a credit card on his father's name, and he used $100,000 on this credit card. Like, what do you even buy on $100,000? That's a lot of money. I don't understand how he was able to spend this kind of money in a very short period of time. On top of that, Mary Jane was on his computer one day and found that Chris has been emailing back and forth with some other woman. He was telling this other woman that after Mary Jane had kids, he doesn't feel as attracted to her anymore. And he's also telling this other woman that he doesn't think that he loves Mary Jane anymore. Because of Mary Jane's religious beliefs, and they're both believing in this, but Mary Jane decides to stay with Chris, unfortunately. Very bad decision. So they stay together, and Chris, in order to save his family from all the problems, Chris decides to quietly sell all the furniture in their house, take all their belongings that they have, and move his family and himself to a little town called Toledo in Ohio. So he thinks that by getting away from all these problems in one state, he won't be found. He's just left, and he's gonna create a new life for himself and his family now. And in Ohio, Chris found an old warehouse for $1,700 a month, and he figured his family can stay there while he will be looking for a job and a better place for them to live. Chris asked Mary Jane not to tell anyone where they were going, and because Chris was still on probation, so there was a warrant out now for his arrest. So since they are living in a warehouse and they sold all their furniture before, they don't have any furniture, and Chris decides to steal items from people's homes to make their warehouse more homey. The landlord of this warehouse didn't check Chris's credit history or anything, and they only needed 1 month's rent. So that was perfect because they couldn't afford any more than 1 month rent at that time. Chris also started cashing forged checks by using his ex-co-workers' names. So he would put checks in his account and would take out portions from the deposited checks in cash. Police was informed that Chris was now in Ohio forging checks. And also because Mary Jane told some of her relatives, so people knew where he was, and the word got around. So police knew that the family was in Toledo, Ohio, but they didn't know exactly where. In Toledo. Around this time in 2001, Chris began a business selling stolen goods from the warehouse where they lived. He put an ad in a local newspaper advertising a brand new skid loader that he was selling, and a man came to look at this skid loader. This man actually found it suspicious that this skid loader that was worth around $30,000 was being sold for $5,000 by Chris. And this man notified police. So police ended up arriving to the warehouse, and Chris, with his charming personality, he explained to the police that he purchased a skid loader about a year ago. Because he needed it for his business, but he never used it, so he decided to sell it, and it was brand new. He said he didn't have the title and registration for it at the time because they just recently moved and it's lost somewhere in all the stuff, but he can try finding it and faxing it later to the police. And police agreed to that. So when they arrived, the police checked the serial number for the skid loader and found that it wasn't missing from anywhere and it wasn't stolen, so they left with that. But one of the surgeons became suspicious when he arrived back to the station, so he ended up tracing the serial number back to the dealership from which the skid loader was bought. The surgeon traced it back to the company to which purchased this skid loader, and turned out it was in Ypsilanti in Michigan, and this company did have a skid loader with this serial number that was missing a few months ago, but they never reported it missing. So police went back to the warehouse to confront Chris, and the family had already left the warehouse. They got all their things and left, but police did end up finding a bunch of stolen goods in this warehouse that family left behind. So they found a large trailer, a boat, and a boat trailer inside this warehouse, and they were all reported missing. So where do you think the family went? The family packed their things, and of course Chris was the initiator. So they were using last bits of their money to drive across the country and sleeping in a tent. On September 12th, 2001, the family ended up in a small town in Oregon called Yachats. Chris and the family were able to negotiate a weekly rental for a 3-bedroom apartment with a $200 deposit and only $190 also didn't really have any skills besides having a charming and convincing personality. He ended up somehow getting a job at a Starbucks coffee shop that was located inside a Fred Meyer store. Meanwhile, Chris was able to also convince a manager at a landing condominiums to lend him a one-bedroom apartment for $1,200 a month with no down payment. But Chris didn't even have $1,200. However, as you know, Chris is someone who didn't really care about tomorrow's problems. He lived one day at a time, as it seems. This is when Chris realized that the problem might be his own family. So he moved into this apartment with his family, but he hasn't paid for the apartment yet. He was able to convince the manager to let them move in, and then he was somehow going to get the money. And this is when Chris starts thinking, well, if I didn't have my family, if I didn't have all these things to pay for my family, then I can live it up. So sometime after work on December 16th of 2001, Chris Longo strangled his wife, 34-year-old Mary Jane, and his daughter, 2-year-old Madison, and he stuffed their bodies in 2 separate suitcases. He brought these suitcases across the street from the condo at which they were staying, and there was a marina there, and he just dropped these suitcases into the marina. Then he took 4-year-old Zachary and 3-year-old daughter Sadie in his stolen Montana van, and he drove to a bridge about 15 miles away from the condo. At about 4 a.m. on December 17th of 2001, Chris tied a pillow that was filled with heavy rocks to Zachary's ankle, and he dropped him into the water that was underneath the bridge, and he did the same thing to Sadie. Medical examiner later confirmed that, unfortunately, they were both alive when they entered the water. They were thrown into the water. To imagine what these poor children must have seen while being thrown into the water by their own father, who is supposed to protect them. After killing his whole family, Chris went back to the condo like nothing happened. He actually continued living at this condo for a few more days. On December 18th, Chris parked the stolen van in which he drove his kids to the bridge at a dealership and removed the license plates. He decided to go look around the dealership after that and found a brand new green Dodge Durango, and he got into the car, and he actually found that keys were in the ignition. So he started the car and drove off. So the workers actually found the van with missing plates on the dealership, and then they found the Dodge Durango was also missing from the dealership. And this is when staff of the dealership called police. Chris would continue working at Starbucks on the morning of December 19th and December 20th. Before he left the area, Chris actually ended up telling one of his co-workers that his wife and kids left him, and then he told the landlord that his wife Chris's son. She also previously babysat the kids, so she knew what the kids look like. Shortly after the discovery of Zachary, police ended up finding 3-year-old Sadie in the water as well. The reason why they were able to find Zachary's body first is because the bag of rocks slipped off his ankle and his body ended up floating to the top, and Sadie's body was found at the bottom of the water of the slough. After the discoveries, police realized that these were the kids of Christian. So now they needed to find the wife, their 2-year-old baby, Madison, and Christian himself. He was also missing. So police goes to the condo where the family was staying at, and of course no one was there at the time. And police sees that there is a summer river and docks very near the house. So they go to look there. This is when they started searching the water, and on December 27th, so it's been about 10 days, the police finds bodies or suitcases with bodies of Mary Jane and little Madison. An autopsy revealed that both Mary Jane and Madison were strangled before being put in the water. Since police wasn't sure where Christian was at this time, they did search the water exclusively just to search for him, but they didn't find him. Police was also able to retrieve baby books, Mary Jane's license, and different baby clothes, and also a film that wasn't developed yet in a nearby dumpster by the condo. This is when Chris was put on FBI's most wanted list, and his photo was distributed everywhere. And there was an episode of America's Most Wanted that featured him as well, because police realized that Chris killed his whole family and was now on the run. Chris, meanwhile, stole a credit card from somewhere, of course, and was using this credit card to fund his run from the police. So it wasn't long for police to start tracking Chris down with the stolen credit card, and they saw that Chris was by the border of US and Mexico. So it looked like he was trying to flee the country. It was hard to get him though, because by the time police would arrive to places where Chris would make purchases, Chris would already be long gone from that place. Police eventually got a tip from someone in Mexico who said that they saw someone who looked like him, who looked like this guy that they saw on America's Most Wanted. And since it already looked like Chris was trying to flee the country before, because police tracked his purchases on a credit card, they took this tip to be credible, and it turned out to really be Chris. While in Mexico, Chris took the identity of a reporter by the name of Michael Finkel, whom Chris idolized because he was a traveling reporter, and this is the life that Chris wanted for himself. So he pretended to be this Michael Finkel while staying in Mexico, and he met another journalist by the name of Janina, who was a journalist from Germany. And Janina was actually a traveling reporter living in Mexico. So Chris began a romantic relationship with this girl Janina, and they even were working on an article together about Mayan mysticism. So Chris was living his dream with no family to worry story about he thought that he got away with his murders. However, after the tip, the police in Mexico and FBI found Chris. He was staying at a campground in Tulum, Mexico. So police pulled him out at gunpoint from one of the campground huts in which Chris was staying with Janina. And this is when FBI asked him if he is in fact Christian Michael Longo, to which Chris responded with yes. This is when Chris was flown back to US and taken to jail on US territory. And Chris ended up pleading guilty to 2 counts of murder of his wife and little Madison. But he said he's not guilty of killing Zachary and Sadie. He claimed that Mary Jane actually killed all of his kids. When he got home from work one day, he saw that they were all strangled by his wife, and this is when he strangled her to death. But the medical examiners know how Zachary and Sadie died. They were both alive when they were thrown into that water. And who does this remind us of? Not sure if you know this story well, but Chris Watts told us the same thing. He told the investigators that Shanann Watts killed all of his kids, and this is why he killed her. In the end, Christian was found guilty of all 4 murders, and he was sentenced to death penalty in Oregon. And guess what? Michael Finkel, the same journalist that Christian was trying to be and took the identity of, in 2015 he decided to go to prison and to interview Christian. And this is when Christian told the truth. Christian confessed to all 4 murders. An update just happened on December 13th of 2022. So just a few months ago, last year, the state of Oregon got rid of death penalty, which means that everyone who was sitting on death row, including Christian Longo, were commuted to life without parole instead. I saw an article that Mary Jane's sister wasn't too happy about this, and she was actually really upset about this decision. She said that the family waited many years for this monster to be executed